Welcome to the Atlanta Real Estate Podcast, the show where we explore the stories behind the people and personalities that make up Atlanta real estate. We interview top producing agents, lenders, builders, contractors, investors, and everyone in between to share their secrets of success and meet the key players driving the Atlanta housing market. I am your host, Mike Lacey. I'm a top producing real estate agent with Sotheby's International Realty, in addition to being a real estate investor in the Atlanta area. In today's episode, you will hear the story of Richie Choy. Richie is a software engineer currently working for Block, formerly known as Square, who fell in love with the idea of financial independence and retiring early, and has used real estate to put him on a path of achieving those goals. In this episode, we cover the benefits of pairing real estate investing with a high-income job. We talk about some of the pitfalls of real estate investing that Richie has had to learn the hard way. And we talk about what factors you should consider when deciding which real estate strategy will work best for you. So if you have any interest in using real estate to build wealth, you are going to get a ton of value out of today's episode. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Richie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited. We've a quick background. Richie actually got me into real estate. So this guy right here is the reason that we are having this podcast. He kind of opened my eyes to real estate investing, and that eventually led to me becoming an agent. So we go way back, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know your story and be on this journey with you. And I know that there's a lot of good nuggets that we can share with people today that they'll be able to learn from. So thank you for sharing that.
Totally. Yeah, it's been a journey. We've been following each other's progress for a while now. It's been great.
It has been great. It has. So take us to the very beginning. How did you first get introduced to real estate investing?
Yeah, I think most investor podcast guests will mention the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad for sure. The root of it was really just not having as much as I wanted out of like a corporate career, pretty much. So, if you have a bad manager or a bad job, it really makes the difference in your happiness. So I was kind of searching around for what would really kind of get me on my own path. And it was kind of pursuing financial independence and then eventually finding real estate through different books on how people have become wealthy and off on their own.
Mm-hmm. So when was this in your life? It was like early or mid 20s that you started learning about this stuff?
Definitely early 20s. It was probably in one of my earlier jobs, and then eventually finding real estate over the years. Yeah. And
okay.
So it took a while to invest as well.
Totally makes sense. So early on, you get your degree in software engineering, you enter the corporate world, you're a full adult now making a real income. And I guess what also comes with that is like realizing like, oh, this is what a 9-to-5 is. And I guess I'm supposed to do this for the next 40 years. Okay. And was it pretty quickly after joining the workforce that you started to learn about retiring early, or like, what was the timeline there?
Yeah, it definitely took a couple years to kind of experience the corporate world, have different managers, have different coworkers and environments around me until I was like, not all of it is amazing, because you go through college thinking like, all right, what's the next thing? It's get a good job. But then when you're there, you're like, what does this consist of? Am I happy here? Sometimes you're not. So you got to dive in and find something else.
Yeah, totally. Well, one thing I know about the FIRE community and anyone else that has read, blogs like Mr. Money Mustache or been on the FIRE subreddit, a lot of those people that have retired early are in tech jobs like yourself. They're high earners. And a lot of them end up retiring through stocks and mutual funds. So talk me through the decision of like what made you be more real estate heavy. I know you weren't all in real estate. I mean, you had some stocks and retirement accounts too. But what made you lean more towards real estate than some of the other people in that community?
Yeah, totally. There's definitely some huge wealth generators that you kind of come across with real estate. And I definitely have a ton of stocks, and I'm pretty well balanced between stocks and real estate throughout and at this point as well. It's kind of just grown like symmetrically. But no, there's a lot of huge benefits. So like one is tax treatment. Like on your rentals, you can claim depreciation. You can make money. You can make a lot of money in a year, and at the end, pay zero taxes on it. There's leverage. So, with stocks, you can lever yourself, but like a lot of people lose their shirts that way. It's not backed by assets when you lend on certain things. So like with real estate, lending is built into it, that everyone gets a mortgage, and these companies and the governments are very willing to partner with you on making a real estate business, really. To offer like 3% rates is just bonkers, right? Because if you were to start a laundromat and get a small business loan, they'd be like whatever, 10, 15% or more. So that you build equity, there's appreciation. There's just a lot of really nice pieces that make it a really strong asset to invest in addition to stocks. I would not certainly replace like my stocks with them. I wouldn't go all in because I do believe in diversification.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, the traditional FIRE model that you'll hear from a lot of people is, they're making 200, 300K a year. They have a really good paying job. A lot of them are in the Bay Area or higher cost of living areas where they can get higher incomes. And then they'll live on, $50,000 a year, just try to save as much as they can and put, $100,000, $200,000 into the stock market every year. Do that for 5 to 10 years. Now they've got $1 to $2 million saved and invested. They follow the 4% rule, meaning if they can live on 4% of that nest egg, so, with $2 million, we're talking $80K a year. Boom, I'm retired. That's sort of the traditional model. It sounds like what you're saying is you saw real estate as a way to get there faster because it's a greater wealth building tool and to also have some diversification. Is that about right?
Yeah, totally. I didn't mention like the passive income that comes with rentals. If you can arbitrage the like mortgage and insurance and expenses, there's that extra cash flow every month that like you could live off of. It's harder to find these days, but like that's certainly that extra boost in getting that passive income. In addition to that 4%, you have your rental income that's paying for your own expenses and your kids and all that stuff.
I think this is a really important piece, is that these are two different ways of looking at how to retire, right? Like we all get at a very basic level, okay, passive income is great. I don't have to do anything and I have income coming in. But there's two different models for reaching financial independence. Model one is I have this huge stockpile of cash or assets where I'm kind of living off the interest or just skimming off the top and trying not to draw down the basis, the principal, and not touch it and just live off that amount. But when you dive into the 4% rule of safe withdrawal, you realize that like if there are multiple recessions, you're now drawing down from that nest egg. And so your pile of cash, so to speak, is shrinking. And that's always worried me. The real estate model or the passive income model says, I've got these assets that are worth X amount of dollars. I actually don't care as much what they're worth. What I care about is how much are they making me each month? And if I can make, call it $10,000 a month from these assets, I don't really care what they're worth because that $10,000 of passive income is covering my bills. So I'm never having to touch the principal. I'm never having to sell a property or sell stock because the monthly income that they're generating is enough for me to not have to work. It's a slightly different model, and I think wrapping your head around that is really important for deciding, do I want to pursue real estate versus stock investing, and to what extent?
Totally. Yeah. There's definitely a big distinction between the equity and the cash flow piece. In a down market, your houses could go all underwater and still be cash flow positive. I mean, that's pretty insane. Like that's how different they are. So you could have negative equity and positive cash flow, and it could still be achieving the ends that you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah. And if you're not forced to sell, then you're fine, right?
Yeah.
You're just living off the passive income. Now, this is actually a question I've never asked you, but I am curious about and sort of relates. You became a homeowner at a relatively young age. A lot of people, even at middle class, upper middle class, don't buy their first home until maybe 30, 35 years old. When did you buy your first home, and what made you decide to do that? Was it investment driven, or what sort of led to you making that decision?
Yeah, we were in our mid-20s, my wife and I, and she basically told me to do it. We were renting at the time. different places, from 800 to 1,000 square feet. And we were just like, let's get a bigger place. We have pets, and then kids came along. So we certainly need the space. There's like a quality of life aspect to it. Now, I was interested in real estate at the time of investing. So it was a dual purpose. Like I could get myself into a starter home, which also doubles as a fantastic rental as you move out of it, upgrade. And we did. And I'm sure we'll get into that more in the future. But like it was a fantastic investment.
I think this is such a good point too for people to realize. I talk to people all the time, being an agent, that are looking to buy, invest, get started in real estate investing, and they're like, I want to go buy an apartment complex. And it's like, okay, you can do that. You're biting off a pretty big, project. But why not start simpler? Why not just get a house, live in it, pay your own mortgage, learn about being a homeowner, learn how to deal with contractors, and you're still building wealth. You basically have a rental property where you're the tenant. And I'm telling you right now, the best tenant you can have is yourself, because you don't have to worry about, them not making payments or beating up the property. It's all within your control. So I think a lot of people don't realize that you can start by just becoming a homeowner, and you're actually on your path to becoming an investor.
Totally. Yeah, that's the exact, I really love that phrasing. Like, you go through all of the motions of buying a rental, you maintain your rental, but you just live in it and you pay your own mortgage. You go through the motions of closing, dealing with attorneys, dealing with insurance, taxes, and like you said, contractors, which is its own thing. Like you should learn how a house works as well and all the systems and components. Learn to make the calls of like, should I replace this? Do I want to make these cosmetic improvements? You go through all the motions, you get the experience without someone barking up your tree and, all those other hassles.
Yeah, that's the only piece you don't get is the property management piece, but that's fine, right? It's like dipping your toes into the water of real estate. You're doing 60 to 80% of the things that a property owner does. And then the property management comes later when you do turn it into a rental. So, all right. So you buy this primary residence as your first piece of real estate. You sort of have this investment mindset about it, that it's going to be a rental property one day. What is the next piece of real estate that you purchase?
Eventually bought a townhouse up in Cartersville. And that was really appealing because the cash flow was there. That was kind of the era of like just gorging on bigger pockets content and, really appreciating cash flow, not trying to rely on appreciation to make money out of it. And Cartersville really fit the bill at the time. We were just, the margins were great. The real estate was cheaper there. So there's a really good cash flow opportunity. We bought a townhouse, pretty much fixed it up myself and leased it out myself. The first time doing both of those, well, we'd fixed the townhouse we lived in a good amount, but leasing it was interesting. Like showing up, interacting with tenants that are far older than you, and just getting everything running as a rental, and it was a really great experience.
Did you ever have any potential tenants that were like questioning if you were the owner, or any interesting interactions there?
Kind of was savvy to like know that there is like rental fraud. Like people will try to rent a property to someone and pull like a deposit out of someone fraudulently, even though they don't own or manage the property. So someone did ask about that. Another person is funny. They're commenting on how young I looked, and they're like, are you sure you know what you're doing here, son? And I was like, you're not gonna make the cut on this one, my friend. You're not renting this. So there's a lot of little funny interactions to go on, but like you're there to make the best call for yourself, and no one else is gonna do it for you. A management company is just gonna have other properties to fill, and other tenants to pick from, and they may not put as much care into it.
Yeah, I've found a couple of the same things. Even recently, I had someone, I was showing them a rental unit, and they kept asking, the owner this, the owner that, and I had let them know in our conversations. I didn't come out and say I am the owner, but when they asked questions, I would say, well, we might do this or we might do that. I was like making it pretty clear that I was the owner, but they just like could not connect the dots. And they were like, well, would they be open to this? And I was like, they being me? But yeah, I do think people find it surprising sometimes. And I actually think that's cool because you do have to have that moment where your brain opens up to the idea of like, oh, I could own property, right? I could be a landlord. Anyone can be a landlord if you want to. And it can be very lucrative. But you have to first realize that that's even possible. Okay. All right, so you buy this first townhome in Cartersville, you fix it up, you get it rented out, you're officially a landlord now, you've got multiple properties, you're starting to build a portfolio. What comes next? What's the next deal?
All right, from there, I'm really searching for more cash flow. And I'm trying to weigh, getting different tenant pools, diversifying in different areas of Atlanta. And it's tough to find cash flow. Even, a couple of years ago, it's hard to imagine that people are struggling to find really good deals a year ago. But eventually we land on kind of a new niche to get more cash flow, and that's rent by the room. So there's a platform that will kind of manage that for you. Basically, you sign up with your property as a host, and they will find tenants that will live in the rooms and cycle them out, collect for you, manage the tenants, the leases. And the idea is you kind of run it and pay for the expenses and common areas, and the margins are much higher than the normal long-term rental.
Okay, so that I think is the key, right? Is understanding, because I was going to ask why do this strategy? Why deal with all the turnover, so many different tenants coming in and out? And the reason is because it's a lot higher cash flow, is what you're saying?
Totally. The cash flow is there. There's other stuff that's there too, though.
Okay, so tell me about that other stuff.
Yeah, well, you're running a very high burden operation, basically. To have so many tenants come in and out, one can be wearing enough on the property. So you get a lot of operational burden. A lot of things need to be replaced very frequently. So it's like at the end you kind of make this call. Is the hassle worth the profit? So say you get $100 a door with a long-term rental, but you make $800 to $1,000 on one of these rent by the rooms. But there's a pretty significant difference in the amount of effort of overseeing that. And you have to make that call. Like, is it worth it? For me, not so much. So I eventually sold out, did a 1031 into a different property.
I think this is a really important point, especially if you are a higher earner and you're debating like, okay, I make really good income. I don't want to do this forever. I want to be able to retire. What's the right real estate strategy for me? And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways people will get from this, because you've tried a couple different, right? So we have long-term rental in Cartersville. Now we have rent by the room in a different part of town. And you're kind of discovering along the way, what's the right amount of cash flow that I want to, that I'm willing to take on the headaches that come with that, versus do I want something easier that makes less money? So with something like this, if you're making $1,000 a property, if you can live off $5,000 a month, you only need 5 of those and you're good, right? Mm-hmm. And like your job could literally be just run those 5 properties. What happened with this deal that made you be like, this is just too much, I can't do it?
Those numbers are so significant too. Like needing 50 single families is a lot of single families to have. So like having 5 just, single families that have more rooms is, theoretically a great way to go. So yeah, there's a huge kind of lean towards, all right, I just need to simplify this. This is far too much work to oversee it. I had hired 2 management companies essentially to run this thing. And I was still very frequently involved in the day-to-day. And through all those management companies comes a lot of inefficiency. So, they take a cut, but they also, may hire things out more expensively or not handle something promptly enough, and then you bleed out money. So yeah, definitely decided to pull the curtain on that. There was some appreciation in it. So, I took the win as it was. And then, like you said, kind of optimizing for simplicity. Like as a high earner, you want to kind of suit your needs for your own life. Like you could optimize for money. You could really seek out the most profits, but at what cost?
Right. I mean, this is a side hustle for you, right? Like you have a day job that pays well, that requires attention. And I think that's kind of the theme of this episode is if you're someone like that too, you have to find a strategy that's a side hustle. It's not your main thing. So, okay, so rent by the room, too much work. You're managing the manager. Even when you try to leverage out the time and energy and effort and all that, you're still having to spend a good amount of it yourself. What do you do next?
So from there, we end up buying a new primary residence. We've got like a young family, so we had some kids and decided we need to get some more space. So we moved and upgrade to a larger single family, obviously leaving the first townhouse vacant and ready to rent itself. So with that, I kind of started networking with people and heard about another niche, so tried another thing. The idea is people will operate an Airbnb out of someone else's property that they don't own. And they call it Airbnb arbitrage. So they'll pay you a rent. You're still a landlord and receive rent from them, but they will run a business out of it, essentially. And they arbitrage whatever they can earn in their business profit against what they pay the landlord. So the idea for the landlord is it is simplicity, right? You have a business now renting your property instead of a tenant. That's a far more responsible entity to kind of collect from. You know that they're, if you know this person, you know that they have a lot more, operating money to kind of shuffle around. They're going to pay the rent. And they're also going to look after the expenses and the repairs, basically, because if a fridge fails, a guest is going to be extremely unhappy, and even losing superhost status is a huge deal. So they will fix that pretty much that day, and you don't have to worry about too much of that stuff.
Okay, and this was on your original townhome that you used to live in, right? So you've moved out of it now. You're like, I'm going to turn this into a rental property, and you link up with this company that says, hey, we'll pay you the rent as if we're the tenant, but instead of them living there, they're actually running an Airbnb out of your townhome, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and the main benefit that you wanted out of this was just the stability that you knew, okay, this is a professional business. They're going to pay me my rent every month. I don't have to worry about, a sob story or someone that loses their job and can't pay.
Certainly, yeah.
Were you getting above market rent as well?
I was not.
Okay.
So this was right at a really interesting time where rents just went through the roof. So right when we signed the master lease, it was a pretty stable rate. That was what I was going to expect out of any tenant, really. And then rents increased by 30% in the market, and that's a pretty big margin to miss out on. For example, that might be being vacant for a quarter of the year. Like that's how significant that difference is. So eventually, I moved back to a long-term tenant there. It's strange because it's almost like I'm optimizing back for money again over simplicity. But if you think about it, like, how could I just miss out on a quarter of the profits there? It wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think you could make an argument that long-term rentals are simpler than short-term rentals. Even if someone else is managing the short-term rental, there's still a lot of wear and tear on, furniture, parts of the house, et cetera, et cetera. So, all right. So you've done rent by the room, decided it was too much headache, done with that. You've still got the townhome that you lived in, plus the townhome in Cartersville. Those are long-term rentals. They're working pretty well for you, and you feel pretty good about, the numbers and the amount of work that's required. What was the next deal you decided to do?
So from there, when I was selling the rent by the room property, there's a decent amount of equity to move into something. So we eventually found a quadplex and just moved the funds from the proceeds of the sale of the rent by the room property into there with a 1031 exchange. Which is just like a tax code piece that allows you to delay paying your capital gains. Moved into a quadplex from the single family.
Love it. So now you've done long-term rental on single family homes, townhomes, houses, etc. And you say, okay, I want to add a bunch more units, right? And I think at this point I had bought 1 or 2 duplexes and had seen some success with my own small multifamily deals. And so we were kind of learning from each other throughout this process, right? Of what's working for you, what's not working, vice versa. And so you go from having 2 units plus the primary to now having 7 total units across 4 properties, right? When you get this quadplex. Yep. And what was your experience like with that?
Yeah, that was definitely good too. Like the lesson is just skip all the stuff that you learned retrospectively is bad and do the multifamily method. I say that in jest, but like you have this nice running rental that's all under one roof. It scales well. That's why people have multifamilies. And, there's definitely a lot of transition. I think one big piece of the multifamilies is like it takes both time and effort to transition a property into a stable state, because you might not get it in the best state, as we both know. Like there could be physical repairs that you need to do. It could be in a really bad condition. So you need that downtime, which is vacancy and expenses out of your pocket to fix things. And also you may just have things running smoothly-ish, but have tenants that just decide that they don't want to pay rent, so you may have to evict them. So yeah, those are all kind of things that you have to, bear through. And then at the other side of it, you get a stabilized property. And that's kind of where I'm at now with that particular unit. So yeah, it's just running more like smoothly after all the overhead and turning of both units and the tenants.
This is such a good lesson. If you have not bought a rental property, just know this. Prepare for the turn. Prepare for the turn. I've experienced it too. It takes some time to get a property to where you want it to be. If you're buying a rental property, there's a pretty good chance that the previous landlord was not running it that well. Either they selected bad tenants, they were ignoring maintenance. There's a reason why they're selling it, okay? If they had the property in tip-top shape with great tenants and they're making cash flow, they're probably not going to sell it. So if you're buying an investment property, there's going to be something that you need to fix, right? That's where the money lies. You're getting paid as an investor because you're fixing a problem. So when you analyze a deal and you put it on a spreadsheet and you say, I'm going to do a $30,000 renovation and I'm going to rent it for this much and it's going to cash flow for this much, you're right, assuming you did your research correctly. But know that it will take time. You might have months of vacancy. It might take longer than you expect to do the renovation. So, it's all well and good, right? When you get that quadplex up and running, you're loving life now. You're not having to deal with as many calls. The units are filled. The rent is coming in. You're making profit each month. And for the next 29 years that there's debt on it, you're going to be in a good spot. But that first year is tough. Just know that there's going to take, it's going to take some time to turn that unit over, and that's okay. If you're going through that, that's okay. That is part of the process of creating a solidly cash flowing property.
Yeah, it requires definitely budgeting for that whole process too, because on a multifamily, you might be down, $50,000. In a year where you have to really cycle through multiple tenants and turn multiple units. And that could be a pretty big swing after making a down payment on a multifamily. Like that's a big deal.
It can take a lot of time and a lot of cash. But like you said, on the other side of that is making profit month to month and also have built in a lot of equity. So, your net worth is growing. The asset is more valuable now. If you did sell it or refinance it, there's wealth that you have created there that you can tap into. So when we talked off air, you mentioned that now you're sort of in a phase of consolidating and simplifying your portfolio. Obviously, the rent by the room was somewhat short-lived. You were done with that. Where are you headed now? Now that you've tried a few of these different strategies, you're a few years farther along in your career. What's next?
Yeah, definitely took the lessons of where I want to fall on the spectrum of active versus passive in terms of strategy. So, there won't be any more rent by the room, that kind of stuff. But yeah, consolidating more is more important to me now. I think simplicity is a little more important. Part of that is having a young family. But the theme is sell the singles, keep the multis. And I think a lot of people are doing this at the moment. Tactically, there's kind of this massive boost in home values. So that equity that you have may not have the same rate of return based on that equity that could be extracted and used somewhere else on the singles in particular. Also, if you consolidate it into multis, you just have everything under less roofs and it's easier to manage.
Makes sense. So it sounds like what you're basically saying is you might have a townhome, and I'm just going to make up numbers here, but you might have a townhome that has $100,000 of equity in it, right? Its value is 100K more than what you owe on it, but you're making like $200 a month in net cash flow. So it's like, all right, yes, I'm making profit, but I have $100,000 just sitting there. I'd rather sell it, have that cash in a bank account, and then I can either go put it in my next multifamily deal or put it in stock and get a better return. Is that sort of the idea?
Totally. Yeah. You just also like in asset allocation, with all the equity growth, you kind of have to rebalance things again. So like if you get a ton of equity, you don't want to, if your decided allocation is half and half, you may have swung to like 80-20. So you need to rebalance.
Yeah, this is always something that's interesting. For anyone that tracks their net worth or tracks like how their assets are doing, your percentage of what's in real estate, what's in stocks, what's in crypto can vary quite a bit without you making any decisions of buying or selling. So like crypto's the best example, right? You might decide I'm going to put 1% of my net worth in crypto, and then it blows up and all of a sudden 10% of your net worth is in crypto because it appreciated so much. And so you're like, okay, well, what do I do now? Should I sell some? And then, if you do nothing, it probably falls back down to 0.1% of your net worth because crypto is so volatile. But yeah, once you start managing your assets and managing your portfolio, you have to keep an eye on those allocations because they can change without you buying or selling any of them.
Totally. But the main theme is, like you said, just consolidate and keep it simple. Like going forward, I don't think I would buy any more singles as well. If anything, it would be more multis. Or, late stage, I would just go total passive. There's definitely a different phases of the investor. I think I'd be pretty different. I know I'm pretty different than I was in my early 20s, and everyone's going to be different along every decade. So changing strategies is important.
Yeah, well, life changes, right? I mean, when you were in your 20s, you didn't have two young kids. You were like ready to hustle, take on these side hustles, these second streams of income. But now it's like life is different. So what you're saying is at some point you'll probably sell all of your investment properties and just put it all in like mutual funds.
Probably, and REITs as well to get that real estate exposure.
Nice. I love it. So let's tie back to if there is someone who's listening that makes good income or, has a lot of cash that they want to invest, software engineer, doctor, or lawyer, something like that. One, would you generally recommend investing in real estate at all to accelerate their wealth creation? And if so, secondarily, what type of strategy do you think tends to work best for those types of people?
It's so hard to dispute that it wouldn't be a good wealth generator for people, and seeing the past couple of years, it's done insanely well for everyone who's a real estate investor. It's really tricky for professionals with a high income because it really depends on where they fall on the spectrum of how active they want their side hustle to be. Like you may even want to think about it as running two separate businesses and comparing which one you want to spend all your time on or how you want to allocate it. Like, as a doctor, you're contracting your time, so that's its own business of I'm the business, I'm contracting my time for some wage, versus I'm a real estate investor running a portfolio. Definitely there's a huge time difference, right? Like 40 to 60 hours versus a couple hours doing this or that. But you have to weigh the hassles. Like if you have to deal with an eviction, sure, it's an hour to file. It's an hour to call someone to pick up the belongings. But over that span, when you're bleeding, there's going to be like a little extra stress of like, oh, you're just making like, you have to sink your own money into it and try and float the property yourself. Or, if a contractor decides that they want your money, but they don't want to do the work at the property, then, that may be another call, which is, 10 minutes to find a new contractor, but like there's going to be a hassle factor to it. So I'd say definitely try and know where you'd want to fall. And that's where homeownership would definitely help. It's like, do I like dealing with contractors? Do I like dealing with properties? You wouldn't be dealing with tenants, but you'd have to use your imagination there of evictions and troubles, and weigh that against the like wealth generation strategies. You also definitely have to be really well researched in like, what is the upper cap of my profession? So like a lawyer they can make partner at their firm and they can make multiple millions in a year. So like, is that, 8 to 12 year grind to make partner, where you can then make multiple millions in a year and also up to it making really solid money. Is that worth the diversion of your focus and energy and stress into that? Or can you know that you would enjoy real estate investing and build this huge passive portfolio that is just generating a ton of wealth without nearly as much time input? So definitely you'd have to weigh those and know where each could end up.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. When I think about it, a few things that make sense for someone like that is you have to think about like their situation, right? They're probably spending a lot of time on their job. If you know any doctors or lawyers, they're frequently working and or stressed out and or wanting to relax, like not think about being productive. So you probably care more about passivity if you're that type of person, right? I think the idea of buying a higher end primary residence makes a lot of sense. One, you want to enjoy your wealth, you want to enjoy your money, but two, you own an asset that you can take care of, you can keep an eye on, and that will probably appreciate well, and that you're paying a lot of debt on, right? If you think about buying $1 million home, appreciating at 4% a year, well, that's $40,000 of additional wealth creation that you don't have to work for. Whereas if you were to buy 4 rental properties at $250,000 each, that's 4 sets of tenants to manage. That's 4 different assets that need to be protected, repaired, insured, etc. So yeah, I think buying, maybe a more expensive primary residence can make a lot of sense from a wealth creation standpoint for those types of people. And then, I think looking for just more passive strategies makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely highlighting that is crucial too. Like, does the doctor need that extra $100 of cash flow per door per month, when they're like in the heat of their career? Probably not. And the more important thing would be where it puts them in 10 years. Like, I have a paid down $1 million residence that's paid for and had good, stable tenants the whole time with minimal repairs. So definitely would be a thing to focus on in real estate for a professional. It's like ease of managing that property and maximizing the equity growth instead of the cash flow.
Makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Okay, well, I think we'll kind of wrap up there and take it to our final segment, which is the final 4. These are the same 4 questions that we ask every guest on the podcast. Number 1, what is your morning routine?
Morning routine is wake up very early, do a lot of stuff that is kind of prescribed in like a lot of those books, like the Miracle Morning, meditate, journal, exercise, or just blow some steam, have some fun, play some video games, do some work, catch up on things, read a book.
Cool. So it's somewhat structured, but if you're feeling like playing some video games in the morning, you'll go for it.
Yep. This year, much of what we covered: simplify, consolidate. Definitely need to, continue being a good dad and husband and all that. There's a lot of personal goals that I have for fitness. We might run a long distance in the spring or summer.
That's true. We are running a half marathon in a couple months and then a marathon a few months after that. So stay tuned for an update.
Maybe a live stream.
Maybe a live stream.
A GoPro.
It sounds good. All right, number 3. What is your favorite thing to do in Atlanta?
I love enjoying food. Just going to different places. There's just a lot of diverse food that you can find in all these different areas. And Atlanta's so segmented. Like, it's just different fractured mini cities, and each area has its own pretty good food. Like, obviously downtown has a ton of good food, but if you go to like Kennesaw, for example, you can find some really good Mexican food. Or in Sandy Springs, like a couple minutes from here, I know of a really good Indian place.
We might be going there after this. That sounds good to me. I love it. And then number 4, where can people find out more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a LinkedIn, Richie Choy, and not too active on other platforms, but connect with me there.
Awesome. Richie, thank you so much for joining us. But I know that you've learned a lot of lessons about real estate the hard way, which we've gotten to hear about today. And hopefully that can help shortcut people's journey, right? If there's someone else that can relate to you in some way, or is even just thinking, hey, I want to build a portfolio, I'm considering all these different strategies. It's awesome in real estate that we have all these options available to us, but it can also be difficult sometimes to try one and fail and then try to figure out, okay, well, do I just double down and learn from my mistakes, or do I try something else? So thank you for sharing your story with us. Such a smart guy, great friend. Thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. All right, that is it for today's episode. Thank you to everyone who made it this far. I truly hope you guys enjoyed the show and got something useful out of it. Seriously, thank you. I mean, we're a brand new podcast just starting out. So anyone that is listening, if you like, subscribe on YouTube, any form of support that you guys can give, we really, really appreciate it. Richie is such a smart guy and has a lot of experience in rental properties. So I'm sure that if you listened all the way, there was something in there that you were able to get out of the show. If you did enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be posting these once a week and would love any feedback or comments that you all have. We welcome questions. We want to make this a fun, engaging, and fruitful experience for you, the listener. And lastly, if you are looking to buy, sell, or invest in Atlanta real estate, I can help you out. You can get in touch with me. I'm on Instagram at RealMikeLacey, or you can email me, MikeLacey@AtlantaFineHomes.com. Thank you again for everyone that watched, listened, supported. Have an amazing week, and until next time.